Okay, first major part is searching. A few things to understand when we begin the very initial parts of this type of work is understanding the types of collections management systems. First type, open source. So open source means that all of the code that makes a system what it is freely available online through services such as GitHub, and the particular products that are made out of it, because the code is open source, different developers can create different sort of modules or widgets, add-ons, etc., custom templates. So it can be a very rich area of products depending on how well the community is around that product. So for open source, the thing you want to be aware of is how healthy the community is that is currently supporting that open source product. Because if the community is not as supportive or there's not as many resources available, it tends to indicate the level of support you can expect. Because it's open source and not proprietary, you do not necessarily get support assistance or any sort of technical troubleshooting because there's essentially no one person to go to and ask for those things. And so for these particular products, you would have to go to the community and sort of crowdsource and troubleshoot with the community what your issue is. So opportunities and challenges there. One of the benefits of open source is it does tend to be cheaper, though be aware, even if it is quote unquote free, there are still costs associated with implementing and using a database. For example, the storage space you will need to host the database and the content you put in it is going to have a cost associated with it. If you are not as technically savvy or don't have a technical person to help you implement the open source product, let alone provide service maintenance, then you may also need to have an outside third-party contract to do that type of work for you, which again costs money. So depending on support, knowledge, etc., it is not free. It's free with an asterisk. There are still costs associated. The second and perhaps most common type is commercial. And with a commercial product or a proprietary product, it does cost money. And there can be two different sort of flavors. The first flavor is off the shelf, which is becoming more and more common for many of the big brand names we are aware of to have some sort of like, here it is off the shelf, minimal to no customizing, take it and run with it. When it is off the shelf, it tends to be more affordable because there isn't so much customizing, because most of the things are already locked in for you. So there's sort of an economy of scale that's happening for the vendor at least. So if you're a perhaps small or moderate sized institution, if you don't anticipate needing a lot of customized or technical support needs, then off the shelf is usually just fine for your purposes and budget friendly. The less off the shelf and perhaps moving into the more customized realm or tools that allow heavy configuration, those will be more expensive. Of course, the more you change something or the more you're asking a company to do something to the product for you, the more it will cost. So is a huge spectrum out there in terms of what the commercial costs could be. And then third option, of course, which is becoming less common, and I think that's a good thing, is the 100% created from scratch. So not open source, because you are not necessarily creating that from scratch. Most of it's already been built for you. This is very much a like building a database on your own computer, or perhaps a volunteer has volunteered their time to do it. Those are incredibly hard to sustain because of their uniqueness. And typically, once the person who's created it has moved on, whether that is retired or gone to a different museum or what have you, there is nobody left essentially who understands how it was built, let alone how to provide maintenance to it. So there's some extreme challenges there. in at least long-term sustainability for those types of systems. So something to be aware of, especially if somebody is out of the goodness of their heart offering this type of option. It can still be quite a challenge and a risk the longer you are using it. Okay, support and placement, two major things to think of as you are considering types of collections management systems. First of which for consideration is software as a service or SaaS. As general population, we're very used to software as a service at this point. Many of the products that we use, especially software, tends to be subscription model, tends to be software as a service. So you're paying annually, usually, for the access to the product as well as servicing of that product. And so it's very much a ongoing relationship as well as an ongoing cost center, which is becoming very typical, and makes sense in terms of maintaining and continuing to evolve the product. There is a concept of support contracts. So, for example, if you are thinking more open source, but you still need that technical support, you can go through and facilitate a support contract with a third-party vendor. That is a very specific scope of work for support of a different type of product. So a little bit different from software as a service, though, depending on the level of detail that you wish to know, can look very similar, if not the exact same thing. In terms of placement, the products that we are now seeing, and especially after going through a global pandemic where remote access to our collections management systems became very important, many of the products have, if they hadn't already, they are now steadily moving towards being cloud access. That is cloud access as like a default. So even if you were in your archives or museum on your local computer, we are moving towards, as a field, that our software and especially our collections management systems are available if you have access to the internet. There are, of course, exceptions, and some of those exceptions stem out of a security and like risk management area of concern. And so, depending on your organization and data, et cetera, you may find that you need a local in situ installing of the collections management system to your more localized computer network. So, it's not to say it doesn't exist. It's not to say that it's not needed. It's just that for the most part, most of us are moving towards the cloud, but you could still have need for an in situ implementation. Costs. As you get to know the systems and as you go through the shopping process, costs is going to be something to pay attention to. Every system is going to be different, so it can be a combination of charging per user or license. It could be including a charge per item or per gigabyte or terabyte at this point for many of us. And those will typically be annual costs. So annual costs will go up due to inflation, but they can also go up if the amount of users have gone up, if the storage size has gone up, that kind of thing. There will also be one-time costs. So setup and implementation of the collections management system will be a one-time cost. Doing the transfer and migration of your data. So for many of us, we're already in a collections management system. Getting your data and content from that system into the new system is going to have costs associated with it, even if you're doing most of it. And any sort of custom, whether it's custom backend or custom front end, any sort of customization, and depending on the product configuration, can also have one-time costs, whether that's one time at point of implementation or later down the road when you want to set up something different. Regardless, those are usually like at that point one-time costs. Where to find collections management system options? There are a few good ones. Canadian Heritage Information Network has a really good extensive list of CMS vendors, and it tends to include not just like North American based, but also Australian and like Western European, sorry, So I tend to like them because there's a very broad listing of products, and of which you get to choose across a couple different major territories. And as an asterisk, just because a particular product happens to be in Europe or happens to be in Australia, many of the larger vendors at this point are used to servicing clientele on different continents and tend to have service hubs set up periodically throughout, geographically throughout the world. So even if it's in Australia, if you love the product, chances are they would be more than happy to support you, as well as have a technical infrastructure available to support you. Randomly, Car Library and Museum has a great CMS table. This one tends to be really great for North American and typically more US based collections management systems. Another good one, Collections Trust. This is based in the United Kingdom. So again, it's going to have a good showing of Western European collections management systems, perhaps more robust in the museum area. So if you're looking for some different vendors other than the usual players over here in the North American continent, that is another good one to check out. And then I recommend, especially if you are on the newer side of getting to know the software, using software comparison sites such as Capterra or G2 can be another great way to start learning about the different systems and what they're best known for. So just another way to sort of like dip your toes into getting to know the collections management system arena, because there are at this point dozens upon dozens upon dozens of different tools you could choose that really could help be of a good match for your procurement. And so getting to know all of them can be overwhelming, but also very important. In terms of tips, as you are shopping for your collections management system, I highly recommend asking a friend in the field to see what they're using. This is usually very helpful if you are speaking with peer organizations, because the chances are that the system they use will be a good fit or at least of interest to you. So it's a great first place to start, especially if you're on the newer side of just like not even knowing what the options are. Another thing to think about, or if you're a little shy and don't want to ask your museum friends, just visiting their websites within 5 to 10 minutes, you can usually tell what sort of system they are using. Sometimes it's as obvious as being on the actual landing page or in the actual website once you're in that database. So you can sometimes tell what they're using that way. Taking a look at professional association pages, some of the larger associations will have directories of different collections management systems, whether it's museum or archives. And related to those professional organizations, if you attend conferences, there's usually some sort of exhibit hall, or at the very least, sponsors of the particular programs that you're going to. And so the sponsors that tend to show up at the conferences you are at, they are already like at least a good match for your area, your geographic area, as well as perhaps your museums or archives particular niche. So checking out what those particular vendors are is usually a good first place to start as well.